Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to see you all here today. Welcome. And I'm pleased to introduce our speaker this morning. Dr. Vic Strecher is a professor in health behavior and health education at University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. He's also the Director for Innovation and Social Entrepreneurship at the University of Michigan School of Public Health. Is the mic on? Mic not on?
Oh, here.
Can you up the mic a little bit? We got the, it's okay. Hear me now, okay? Is that better? Okay. Dr. Strecher has been involved in many projects. He's been a journal reviewer, including for the Annals of Internal Medicine. He's taught undergraduate and graduate courses. He has dozens of publications to his credit. He's written books and book chapters on healthy behaviors. He's founded the Center for Health Communication, and indeed he's started Jewel Health, which is an online application to help promote positive, healthy change. And he's going to speak to us today on life on purpose.
Great, thank you. Can everyone hear me? Does this mic work? Is this working? Oh, yeah, that's good, okay. You want to jack it up just a little bit? Back there? Okay, great. That's not good. There. Okay, is that good? Can you hear me in the back? Oh, thank you. Okay, great. So thank you, first of all, for inviting me. It's really, I love Portland. And this is, of course, the Benson Footbridge. And this is Simon Benson, who happens to be, my mother told me, my great-great-granduncle, which I didn't know until about 10 years ago. And I was walking around Portland, and I was talking to my mom, said, "Hi, I'm in Portland." She said, "Well, you should drop by the Benson Hotel." And I didn't know anything about this guy and found out he was a lumber baron. He is destitute after his general store in northern Wisconsin burned down, and this Norwegian immigrant, he was an immigrant from Norway, came over in the 1800s and started inventing a few things that allowed him to ship logs down to San Francisco and Los Angeles and built those cities. He created Benson Polytechnic. I went in, hung out at a bar with a bartender at the Benson Hotel. He said, "Well, I went to Benson Polytechnic." And it was the first school that allowed women in a technical school on the West Coast. He created the Benson Bubblers, of course, that you're probably familiar with, that were open to everybody, all walks of life. And then hanging out in this Benson Hotel, I started, it's maybe the most beautiful lobby I've ever been in my life. There's a special type of walnut that grows in just this one small forest just north of the Baltic. And this wood doesn't exist anymore. That whole forest is now gone. And there is no wood like this anymore. So I'd suggest going to the Benson Hotel and hanging out, which I did. And I learned a little bit about Simon Benson, and this is something that he said, that no one has the right to die and not leave something to the public and for the public good. And I think that really captures the theme of what I'm going to talk about today, which is purpose and legacy in a way. So today I'm going to be starting off with my conflicts of interest. I have many of them. My collaborators, I have many of them. A personal story. I'll get into the philosophy of purpose. And then the science of purpose, and I'll try to meld those two together a little bit, and then we'll talk about how to find greater purpose and direction in your own life. Make sense? Okay, we'll see what we can do here. So these are my conflicts. I have this company called Jewel Health. I'll mention this very briefly toward the end. It's not a sales pitch, just showing you what I do. I am an investor in 23andMe. I'm not going to talk about 23andMe in this talk, but I will be talking a bit about gene expression. So wanted to mention that. I've written 2 books. On the right is a graphic novel called On Purpose. If you're into comic book-like books, this is, I'll be showing some images from that. And Life on Purpose was a little more recent, a book that I wrote about the science and philosophy of purpose. And both of these make wonderful holiday gifts, I just want to tell you. And Christmas is not too early now, just think about that. I do want to mention my fabulous collaborators. I couldn't be doing any of this research without these young and unbelievably bright people from Harvard University, from Penn. and Wisconsin, and I'll be mentioning some of our research as we move forward. So I'm going to start with this study that was done that began by randomizing people to 3 groups. And one group, they gave this backpack and put a backpack on everybody. And the backpack had a bunch of dead weight in it, just metallic, big metal weights in the back. And they told people, this has a bunch of big, dumb metal weights in your backpack. It's 25 pounds, pretty heavy, and we'd like you to carry it. So these guys were in this group just saying, I have no purpose for carrying this backpack, don't know why I'm doing it. And then there's another group where they gave the same backpack, just a bunch of dumb weights in the back, the backpack. But in this one, they put this fan, just an electric fan in the back, and that was meant to make it sound like it was scientific equipment, special scientific equipment. And they said, you are carrying very, very important scientific equipment. Very important to the study, very important to mankind. You know, this is a big deal, this backpack you're carrying. It's 25 pounds, but super important. So this person felt like they had a purpose while they were carrying this backpack. This is a purposeful backpack. And then they had a control condition. Basically, I'm in the control group. So what they did then was blindfold everybody. They put everybody individually then on a slope, a ramp that was 14.5 degrees. And blindfolded, very often in previous studies, people tend to overestimate the slope. We all do, don't we? Metaphorically. We see, you know, there's some tough thing to do, and we say, oh, that's a little tougher than it really is. That often happens. So people, sure enough, on average, in the control condition, even though it's 14.5 degrees, when asked blindfolded how steep is the slope, they said 31 degrees on average. So then they put the people with the backpack, the purposeless backpack. You're just carrying 25 pounds of dead weight. How big is the slope? 42 degrees, they said, on average. Then they put the purpose backpack people on and said, how steep is it? 31 degrees. Right back to the control condition. In other words, having a purpose seems to level mountains. It seems to level slopes. Everybody has had a mountain. In this room has had some mountain that they've encountered, I'm guessing. Every single person has had some difficult time in their life that they've faced. And the question is, do you face that with a purpose? Do you get a purpose out of it? What happens? So that's what this talk is really about. And I had a situation like that when about 6 months after our daughter Julia was born, we were on sabbatical in the Netherlands, and she caught a chickenpox virus. And we had an older daughter, Rachel, at the time, who was just 4 years old. But Julia was 6 months old when she started getting sick and losing weight. And finally, they discovered that her heart had been attacked by this chickenpox virus. And she had what's called a cardiomyopathy, an idiopathic cardiomyopathy, that actually had destroyed her heart already, completely ruined it. And we were told that she wouldn't have much more than a month to live. So we took her out of the hospital that night. The next morning we flew home. Home was Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where I was a teacher at the University of North Carolina. And we brought her right to the hospital that next day, and they said, after about a week of testing, they said, you know, she might actually be eligible for a heart transplant. That would be our only hope. She'll die otherwise. But we could list her. We have a new surgeon from Stanford who would like to do one. We already had one child die waiting, but if you're up for it, you know, if you want to list her. So we went back to the house, sat around our dinner table that we call the gathering place, and we still do. We don't watch TV and eat. We literally do sit at a dinner table and eat and talk with each other about our day. But in this case, we were asking a pretty big question. Should we list our daughter for a heart transplant, or should we let her die? And so we decided if we were to list her, and we knew that 50% of kids died waiting for a new heart at that time in 1990. We also knew that if she got a new heart, her chance of becoming 5 years old was about 50%. So 50 times 50, that's 25% chance she'd become 5 years old. So we had to ask ourselves, should we do this? And we decided if we could give her a big life, if we could allow her to be her best self, and then we started asking, what is a best self? What is a big life? What does that mean? And so we started creating criteria for this that included, well, if she could have some degree of autonomy and choice in her life, if she had social connections, friends in her life, if she could start mastering things, even if she's 3 years old, or 4, 10, 20, 50, any of those times, if she could do those three things, mastery, connection, social connection, and autonomy or choice, if she could have those things, in other words, if she could be a self-determining human being, even as a child, it'd be worth doing. And we'll live every day of her life, if she is lucky enough to get a heart, we'll live every day as if that might be her last day. And so she ended up becoming the first child in the southeastern part of the United States to get a new heart. And she lived a very, very big life. Did a lot of things. She was on the softball team. She was a horrible softball player, by the way. She got 1 hit in 3 seasons. I was her coach. But when she got that hit, I was like in tears. I went, oh my God, you got a hit. And then I started realizing I should do this for all the kids, you know? Why not? Why should I celebrate every hit that a child gets, or every accomplishment, or every issue? Why don't I deal with it as if that might be her last hit or her last day? And it turns out that the Stoic philosophers did exactly this. 2,000 years ago, Marcus Aurelius would wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to die today. Can you imagine Mrs. Aurelius, how pissed off she would be? Like, you know, you're having your granola and Marcus is eating and going, I'm going to die today. Mrs. Aurelius goes, you say that every morning, Marcus, and you always come home alive, unfortunately. And you can imagine this idea, how annoying that would be to say, I'm going to die. Why would they do that? Why would Seneca wake up every morning and say, I'm going to die? Why would Stoic philosophers kiss their children goodnight and say, you won't wake up in the morning? Because when they did, they celebrated that life more. Because in a way, death becomes a contrast to life that makes life so much more powerful. And that's what Julia did for us. Julia allowed us to see life in Technicolor, and not a Make-A-Wish type of life. I love Make-A-Wish. Make-A-Wish, you know, obviously for very sick and often dying children, giving something extraordinary. But we didn't want to go to Disney World and have Julia meet Cameron Diaz every day. You know, we didn't want to have some extraordinary event like that. It just meant having a bigger life, being present in that moment. Not living in the past, not living in the future, but just enjoying life. And we started doing this in general for our lives, our family. And suddenly our lives turned into Technicolor from black and white. It was very interesting. Julia wanted to give back. She had a second heart transplant when she was 9, and she learned that the people who she felt gave the most to her were nurses. So she said, I want to be a nurse. So she went to the University of Michigan to become a nurse, and as a freshman, she was working really hard, and we then took her and her boyfriend to the Caribbean. And we took our older daughter and her boyfriend to the Caribbean. And I know you might be thinking, you took their boyfriends? Are you crazy? But you know, we lived every day as if that might be her last. And we said, she's in love, they are great together, love this. Let's live our lives as if that might, you know, as if that might be our last. So we were in the Caribbean, and we were at our gathering place, only it was on the beach. And the third night in, we were walking on the beach, and she walked back to her room. She turned to us and said, I just want to tell you I'm so happy now that I could die. And that night she did. Very suddenly, she died of a heart attack, very unexpectedly. She had just been checked out. She seemed fine. And it was just absolutely sudden. And when that happened, I lost my own purpose in my life. Because that was my purpose. I didn't know to call it a purpose. It was just my purpose. The first thing my wife said after we knew that she had died is, I've lost my job. And so she had lost her purpose. So one of the things, and for all you physicians out there and nurses and other health professionals, I found something that helped a great deal. We went to a grief counselor afterwards, and I was really kind of concerned that we might end up getting a divorce over this, my wife and I. And so I turned to the grief counselor and I said, did you know that 80% of families, you know, break up after the loss of a child? And she said, yeah, but, you know, 50% of couples break up anyway. Oh, okay, fine. So anyway, but she said one important thing. She said, and this is something that might be good advice for others who are doing grief counseling in any shape or form. She said, you two will grieve in your own way. And if you judge how the other person grieves, if you judge the timing of the grief or some type of recovery, quote, recovery from grief, if you start judging the other person and how they're grieving, you will break up, guaranteed. So you're going to grieve in your own way. You have to allow the other person to do that. And my wife is a sculptor, and she's an artist, and so she just decided to focus on her sculpting and gardening and things like that. I went to northern Michigan. We always do this in Michigan. We say, where are you located? Ann Arbor's here. I went up here, just right on the coast of Lake Michigan, which is beautiful. And I started eating and drinking myself to death. And I started, basically, for the next couple of months, I just hung out there by myself in this cottage, just eating and drinking and watching Kim Kardashian on TV. That is really a sad state of affairs. I started caring about what blue jeans Kim Kardashian was wearing. I realized that I was caring about somebody and other things that I really shouldn't be caring about, but I didn't care. That was the thing. I didn't care about anything. I had a big dream one morning, and I woke up at 5, and I looked out at Lake Michigan. Anybody been on Lake Michigan? Yeah, it's like usually the waves are like this, or like, they're big. It's like an ocean. I woke up at 5 in the morning, and I heard no waves. And I looked out, and it was like this carpet. It was perfectly smooth, like glass. And I jumped out of bed. Now, this is in spring, early spring, and this is a very bad idea in early spring to go out onto Lake Michigan. But I decided to jump right into a kayak, no wetsuit, right into a kayak where the water is probably around 40-some degrees. The air was just a little more than that. And it was still dark outside. And I just started rowing straight out. And I was about 2 miles out in my boxer shorts and T-shirt. That's too much information, but it's just that's what I was sleeping in. And I jumped out. Literally, within 1 minute, I was out on the lake. And I was rowing like crazy, just as hard as I could, and I was loving it. And I was thinking after about 2 miles, this is so smooth today. Maybe I'll just paddle to Wisconsin, which is 88 miles. That's a very bad idea. But that's what I was thinking about doing. And then the sun came up. And the sun, as it came up, everything around me started glowing. And just, the ripples, the light ripples just made everything started shimmering around me. And I felt my daughter, Julia, in me. And I don't know how else to describe this. I'm a scientist. I don't believe in an afterlife personally. But I felt her in me, and I felt her telling me very deeply and in a way that was very, very vivid, you need to get over this, Dad. And it wasn't like, you need to get over this, Dad. It was like, you need to get over this. You need to get over your own ego. Everyone was feeling sorry for me. They were letting me drink and eat myself to death. The university said, you don't have to teach. Don't worry. You don't have to teach now. You don't have to teach in fall semester. Don't worry. You just lost your child. It's the worst thing. So don't worry. So I was feeling really sorry for myself. And I thought, God, if I don't change right now, I'm at a crossroads right now, 2 miles out in the middle of Lake Michigan, and if I keep going, I'll die. In other words, if I keep going in this lifestyle, I will die. If I turn back, I'm going to have to change everything. And then so I decided, well, first of all, I should say something about this picture. This is part of a graphic novel, and I had a DC Dark Horse comic book illustrator do this. And I said, I want you to make me look thinner and more handsome than I really am. And he said, okay, it's your book, dude. Fine, whatever. You're paying for it. But I said, I want my daughter to look exactly the way she did. So that's Julia, my daughter. So I came back like this, and I said, I'm a behavioral scientist. That's what my training is. I help people change their health behaviors, to quit smoking, to manage their stress, manage, various health behaviors, to self-regulate, to be a better survivor if they've had cancer, whatever. That's what I do for a living. If I can't fix myself, what frigging good am I? So I came back and said, let me become the subject of my own research. I'm going to try to fix myself. And if I can't, fine, I die. So what? I haven't lost anything. So I wrote down the things that mattered most in my life. I simply asked myself, what matters most? I was still in my boxers and T-shirt, sat at the kitchen table, and wrote down the things that mattered most in my life. Love, beauty, my daughter, my older daughter, Rachel, my wife, the world, my parents. and my students matter a lot. And from that, I then started writing down my first purpose in life that I've ever written down. My purpose to enjoy love and beauty. That's my personal purpose. If you're thinking about what is a purpose, we'll get to it. This is my purpose, to be an engaged son, husband, and father, to teach every student as if they're my own daughter, and then to help over 1 billion people find greater purpose and meaning in their lives. You notice that there are 4 domains: a personal purpose, a family purpose here, a work purpose, and a community or global purpose. Is that making sense? Makes it easier to think about a purpose. Also notice that each of these things, or most of them, have goals set around what matters most in my life. My students matter most in my work. So I said, I'm going to teach every student as if they're Julia. And so I called that afternoon then, that I came back from to the shore, I called the University of Michigan and said, I'm coming home tomorrow, and I'm going to start teaching, and I'm going to teach like I've never taught before. I'm going to teach my students as if they're my own daughter. And they said, wow, okay. That was really the beginning of a recovery for me. Now, I started also trying to learn more about a purpose in life, because I realized that's what I was doing. And I wasn't into this existential stuff before, not at all. I mean, I didn't know anything about it. We had some researchers I knew who were doing purpose in life research. I thought, that's so flaky, it's so weird, it's mushy, it's trying to predict other mushy things. Who cares? And then I started reading about it. Socrates said this. He said, the unexamined life is not worth living. But then Aristotle, and I'm paraphrasing him, in Nicomachean Ethics said, yeah, that's right, Socrates, but a life without purpose isn't worth examining in the first place. Pretty interesting. So what is a purpose in life? All I'm saying by purpose is that it starts with what matters most in your life. Think about, just for a second, what matters most in your work, what matters most in your family, what matters most in your community. By the way, we'll go through a little exercise. I hope all of you have a little sheet, a survey sheet. We'll get to this in a second. But what are those things? You identify those and then set a goal around them. Goal setting works better than just saying, do your best, it turns out. If we want you to hold your breath as long as you can, and I won't ask you to do that, if I just said, hold your breath as long as you can, on average, maybe people can hold their breath 45 seconds in here, something like that. I don't know. But if I had a clock up here and I said, let's hold our breath for a minute, I'd get that much on average. I'd get about 10 to 15 seconds more, just because we set a goal. How about, does anyone use checklists in here? You know, on a weekend, I've got to do the laundry today. I've got to, do the dry cleaning. I've got to cut the grass. I've got to pick up milk, whatever. So those are checklists. If you just say, I'm going to get up and do a lot, you know you won't do as much as if you have a checklist. Atul Gawande wrote this wonderful book called The Checklist Manifesto. We know in medicine and nursing and in healthcare that having checklists works really well, and it prevents a lot of death. So what I'm talking about by purpose in life is that it's like a checklist of the things that are most important in your life. You don't just wake up and say, I'm going to be a good person. You wake up and say what my purpose was. You have that purpose in your office. So how do we measure the strength of people's purposes? We ask people questions like, I have a sense of direction and purpose in my life. Some people wander aimlessly. I'm not one of them. And there are typically 6 questions that are asked, and they're put together then in a scale. I have no purpose at all. I have a super strong purpose. Then we start looking at what happens to people. And we find out, and these are epidemiologic studies. So I might study smokers. I want to find out whether smoking is contributing to lung cancer, for example. You can't just take 2 little kids and say, okay, twins, Doodly, you don't smoke, okay? Snoodly, the brother, you smoke. And then we'll follow you guys for 50 years and see who gets lung cancer. You can't do that, right? So it's really hard to do a lot of these studies by initially just saying, you have purpose and you don't, but and randomize people. So at least in a lot of studies, they're just following people who have a stronger purpose versus those who have a weaker purpose in their life, okay, using this kind of measuring tool. That makes sense? And then following people over time, and then statistically controlling for age and race and gender and income and education and health status and health behaviors to see what happens. And it turns out that people with a strong purpose do much better. They recover better from loss of loved ones. They recover better from cancer. they recover better from heart disease, they recover better from tsunamis and earthquakes, they recover better from returning from the Gulf War as a soldier. In fact, if you can return with purpose, you're more likely to develop post-traumatic growth, something we don't talk about a lot, right? Rather than post-traumatic stress. You're actually more likely to grow from experiences. This is nothing new. The Buddha talked about how suffering is what gives us life. Suffering is what actually gives us meaning and direction and makes us human and a better person. I want to show you a composite of 10 twins. These are identical twins, but these photos are composite pictures of the 10 identical twins. And they did an initial sorting going, which twin, by the way, any identical twins in here? Okay. But if you were, you'd have the same genome, obviously, when you're born as an identical twin. And then suddenly life happens. And over time, you start looking different, as you can see from these photos. These people were rated by a large group of judges to be 10 years older than that composite set of twins. What's the difference? What's going on? Well, there's a big difference in their DNA. Their telomeres, the ends of their chromosomes, are shorter in the older ones. Telomeres are kind of like the ends of the aglets on our shoelaces. And imagine, on our shoelaces, we have these little plastic caps called aglets. And when they crack or start breaking, we know we need new shoelaces, right? That's very similar to this kind of concept of telomeres, these end caps that start shortening over time. And they shorten with stress. And they're fueled by an enzyme called telomerase. And we need telomerase to fuel the ends of our chromosomes to keep them healthy. When they shorten, we start getting sick and we die. Make sense? So Elizabeth Blackburn discovered the role of telomeres and won the 2009 Nobel Prize. And there's a great book on this if you want more. She and Alyssa Epple, who's a psychologist, started doing a lot of research on this. And what they found was that people, and by the way, this is Elizabeth on the left, Alyssa Epple's on the right. What they found is that people who had a lot of stress in their lives had shorter telomeres. Moms who had kids who were chronically ill had much shorter telomeres than moms who had kids who were not chronically ill. And then they followed people over time longitudinally, like what happens, and it turns out that more stressful life events shortened their telomeres and lessened the amount of telomerase in their blood. So they started thinking maybe stress is really related to this. That would make perfect sense when you look at these twin studies, for example. So what they decided to do is intervene, and they said, well, let's take our laboratory at the University of California, San Francisco, and move it all to the side of a mountain in Aspen, Colorado, where there's this wonderful meditation retreat that engages in what's called loving kindness meditation. Loving kindness meditation is a beautiful meditation. You can look it up online. And so here's what they did in this study: intensive meditation training, immune cell telomerase activity, so that's the telomerase, psychological mediators. We'll get to that in a second. So here's what they did. They had people meditate for 3 months. Loving kindness meditation for 3 months on the side of a mountain in Aspen, Colorado. Not bad. They had a lot of people who wanted to be in this study, so they took a big wait list group, and oddly enough, and they made them the control group. They said, you are in a wait list control, and so you'll wait for 3 months, and then we'll enroll you in the study after that. And so that's what they did. And sure enough, the meditators, compared to the control group, had much more telomerase activity at the end, much more. But here's what happened, which is cool. Now maybe we're actually repairing their DNA through meditation. Very cool. But they had this psychological mediator. Mediators are mechanisms that are starting to explain what's going on in between these things. And so they had taken that measure of purpose in life that I showed you before. I have a direction and purpose. Some people wander aimlessly. I'm not one of them, etc. They took that very measure, and they found that that explained why the meditators were doing better. The meditators were building a stronger purpose in their life, and it was the purpose, not the meditation, that resulted in greater telomerase activity. That's pretty interesting. Now we're starting to go, whoa, what's going on here? Now let's look at some of the accumulated evidence on purpose. People with a strong purpose live longer. 4 studies of this, including one by Angus Deaton, a Nobel laureate in economics. People with a strong purpose over time are far less likely to develop stroke. They're far less likely to develop heart attacks. They're far less likely to develop diabetes, and if they do get diabetes, they're better able to manage it. they're far less likely to relapse after cocaine treatment, inpatient treatment for cocaine, drug abuse, or alcohol abuse. People with a strong purpose in life, this is interesting. Anyone retired in here? Okay. Thank you, by the way, for coming here. I think that's so cool. Wonderful study by Patricia Boyle at the Rush Alzheimer Center. Very interesting study. 951 retirees. Here's the deal. Here's what she noticed. Retirees often say, I can't wait to retire because now I'm just going to golf every day. Then after 5 days, they realize they suck at golf. And they're tired and their bones hurt and everything hurts. And they're going, I don't know if I'm going to, so I'm going to watch the Golf Channel. So they watch the Golf Channel. And then they start eating Doritos and watch the Golf Channel. And then they start getting obese and eat Doritos and watch the Golf Channel. Then they start developing diabetes and eating Doritos with diabetes, Golf Channel. You see the point. It's not good. You have to repurpose your life. I think you need a new purpose every time you need a Hallmark card. When you graduate, if you get married, if you have children, if you get sick, if you lose a loved one, if you retire, anytime, those are like concentric rings on a tree, and you start maybe needing to rethink, what is my purpose now? Maybe even preparing for that before retirement. If you don't, you can run into real trouble. I'd even say, and I'm sure that most of you were big deals before you retired. I say the bigger they are, the harder they fall, if you're not careful. Because very often, everybody looked up to you, did a lot of things for you and with you. You had a lot of colleagues, you were doing exciting stuff, and now you have the Golf Channel. There are big issues here. There are things that you need to do to repurpose. So one of the things we're doing is working with AARP to start helping people rebuild purpose. And then the next step will be running a trial. See, does that purpose, can we actually intervene just like a pill? Could we create a purpose pill that helps people develop greater purpose in their lives and meaning? One thing that we found very clearly is that volunteerism works extremely well. Volunteering, doing things, still being active in the community that sounds, trivial and just a nice thing to do. Turns out it's essential. By the way, the people in this study who retired who had no purpose were 2.4 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease 7 years later. 2.4 times more likely. That's amazing. That was controlling for age and race and gender and income and education and health behaviors and health status, and also removed anybody with any cognitive deficit to begin with. They also autopsied their brains to look for lesions. I mean, this is a very carefully done study. If this were like something like the pressure against an artery, in other words, blood pressure, or if it was if it was a diet, or if it was smoking, we'd have $100 million invested by NIH to study it. Since it's this existential construct, people, well, you can't measure that, you can't change that. In fact, JAMA, there's a guy, the dean of the School of Public Health at JAMA, at Harvard, wrote an editorial in JAMA saying, wow, this purpose in life thing is so cool. Too bad we can't intervene on it. Of course it's impossible to do that. Why? I don't get that. So we'll talk about how to intervene on this. People with a strong purpose is a study I did with my colleague Eric Kim and Carol Riff, who developed the Purpose in Life scale. What we found is that people with a purpose have better health behaviors. They start building better health behaviors. And they have engage in more preventive health activities. And interestingly, you're in a hospital here, found that for every unit increase that you were increasing over 5 years, in purpose in life, you had a 17% reduction in your hospital visits. I know of no drug that does that. So this is a side effect. People with a strong purpose have better sex. Oh, that's too bad. I mean, that's a side effect of having this drug that's a purpose, having a purpose. Oh, is it an expensive drug? No, it's free. So we'll talk about that. By the way, people who have a stronger purpose make more money over time. That's statistically controlling for income and amount of wealth. And people who have a strong purpose end up increasing their income, controlling for baseline. This is an interesting study, Derailed by Diversity. Here's what my colleague Anthony Burrow at Cornell did. with his colleague from Washington University, Patrick Hill. They had students write down their purpose. What does it mean to have a purpose? What's your purpose? Where does the sense of purpose come from? Or in the control condition, what was the last movie you saw? Who are the characters in the movie? They had them do that before entering the L, which is a metro train in Chicago. Anyone been on the L? Great train. They had this one running north to south. And as it went south, you ended up moving into South Chicago, where it was much more ethnically heterogeneous. And so a lot more diversity. And for a lot of people, scarier. So as they moved to every stop, they asked the person to write down on a little survey, how alone and afraid and distressed are you right now? And they also had a research assistant just study what the ethnic composition was at every stop in that train car. Pretty cool study, isn't it? So they randomized people. I'm writing down my purpose, or I wrote down the last movie I saw, and now we're putting you on this car, and we're going to see how nervous you get. The people who just wrote down the last movie they saw, by the last stop in South Chicago, on a scale of 0 to 7, they were close to a 5. That's feeling pretty distressed overall. The people who just wrote down their purpose, literally taking 2 minutes to write down their purpose, were a 1. That's a big difference. Now, by the way, this is not the solution to diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are structural and historical reasons and issues, and there's so many things that we need to do in our society to change this problem. On the other hand, everything does go through your ears, too, right? This is an interesting thing that happened. People became just simply less defensive, less afraid, more open. Then they did another study looking at people's nervousness in heterogeneous cities. And so they started with this simple question, or this exercise, just like the other one, write down your purpose. Or in this case, the control condition was take a moment and think about your typical day. Write down what your typical day is like. Then they showed these white adults. These were not students, actually. These are all white adults. And they said, take a look at this homogeneous city. And every blue dot, this is literally the map that they showed people. I asked Anthony for the actual PDF of the map. They said, here it is, and all these blue dots are white people. So you see, you're going to live in white city land, okay? And you can do that. Or here's another city that's very ethnically diverse. A lot of different colored dots. Which city would you rather live in? They asked these over 100 white adults. Good question. So 6% in the control condition, I just wrote down my typical day, 6% said I'll live in the heterogeneous city, the diverse city. 24% said I'd like to live in that heterogeneous city. Now that's not 100%, but it's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, that you could change things, shift things that much. If we had a pill that did this, it would be like in our drinking water. I mean, it'd be coming out of Benson bubblers. I would love that. So a big question is why? What's going on? What's going on in the brain? So that's something that I study quite a bit. And there are 2 parts of the brain I'm going to focus on just a little bit. One is this very reptilian part of the brain called the amygdala. It's reptilian, we call it, because reptiles have it. It's very basic. And then we have this prefrontal cortex. That is very human. In fact, humans, primates all have a prefrontal cortex, but humans have the most, the greatest proportion of prefrontal cortex. And we always used to think, well, the amygdala, that's fear and aggression. Boy, I wish we could just get rid of that thing. Turns out it's really important. It's important to feel fear sometimes. It's important to be threatened sometimes and feel that. You just don't want to only feel fear and threat all the time. And it turns out that these 2 regions of the brain do this beautiful dance together. And the prefrontal cortex, in a way, is almost like your guru brain, and especially the ventral medial prefrontal cortex. This is related to the self and self-related processing, like, who am I? It's really a great part of the brain that makes complex decisions for us. The amygdala just says, holy crap, something has happened. This is horrible. Run away. So what we do is put people into MRI. We clamp their heads down. We give them these instruments, and then we show them really scary pictures. I'm showing you a scary picture that people literally do see while their head's clamped down in MRI, and it's clanking away, and they see this picture of a rabid dog jumping at them. And by the way, this is the nicest picture we show them. That's the idea is to really get this amygdala going, and that's what we do. And what we find in a healthy person is that within seconds of showing them a really scary picture. Their amygdala is getting all the blood flow. Their prefrontal cortex actually gets less blood flow suddenly. It shrinks. And then something interesting happens. It flips. It reverses. Suddenly, the guru brain is going, okay, what do I do about this? So this is how special forces are trained, how a lot of groups are trained, Navy SEALs, to say, okay, that's a threat. What do I do about it? As opposed to that's a threat, and that's it. But a lot of people who have a hard time with fear, who are very anxious people or depressed people, their amygdala takes over. And when that happens, then you don't get any blood flow to the brain. It's very easy to scare people. Every president scares the crap out of their public because they know then they can control people. You know, there might be a war. There's, you know, immigrants coming in, whatever. You know, I'm not going to get political. It's just, it's so easy to scare people. Simple. And then once you've scared them, they stop thinking. And they just, like, whatever you say. This is Tom Brady. I'm putting him in the University of Michigan costume because he was. I have this other conflict. I'm from the University of Michigan, okay, so I'm going to brag on us. But I call this bounce the Brady bounce because Tom Brady has his head smashed into the dirt, some linebackers dancing over him, shouting and screaming obscenities at him, and he gets up and goes, oh, man, that was horrible. What do I do about it? I like that. That bounce that you get, that's the bounce of resilience. And people who have that bounce turn out to be less likely to be emotional eaters. They're less likely to be problem drinkers. They're less likely to get in arguments and fights with their coworkers, and they're less stressed out. We found that when we ask people to think about their self-transcending purposeful values in MRI, while they're literally thinking about them, they get less blood flow going to the amygdala. So when I'm thinking about my purpose, I'm not as scared, which is kind of cool. And we just published this study, 2018, where we had people affirming their core values in, these are sedentary people, and we're threatening them with a message saying, you need to work out more. You need to become less sedentary. That's threatening to people. You need to quit smoking. You need to go on a diet. You need to manage your diabetes. That's threatening to people. And when you threaten people, that amygdala goes off, and no blood flow goes to the prefrontal cortex. What we found is that when they start thinking about their purposeful core values, their prefrontal cortex just floods with activity, gets crazy. And the more activation the prefrontal cortex gets, the less sedentary people become. And that's monitored in these sedentary people by accelerometry. We gave everybody Fitbits and we followed them. So a big question you might be asking, I think we've hopefully established, we think anyway that having a purpose is a good thing. We think we may even be able to have your brain start thinking more purposefully, and when that happens, good things seem to happen almost right away. You become less defensive to change, less defensive to new things. So that seems to be good. But there may be different kinds of purposes. And Aristotle said there are two kinds of purposes, basically. There is a hedonic purpose. A hedonic purpose represents the sum of an individual's positive affective experiences. In other words, pleasure. You know, and all of us like pleasure. We all like good food or good wine or good sex or things like that. That's natural for us. That's hedonism, right? But if that's all we like, Aristotle said, then we are like grazing animals, he wrote in Nicomachean Ethics. That's all we are. It's good to be, you know, it's great to graze, but that's not all we want to do. So he said there's this other way, eudaimonic form that results from striving toward meaning and a noble purpose beyond simple self-gratification. So we have these two words. We have hedonic, which you probably know. We have eudaimonic, which you may not know. Eudaimonic or eudaimonia. What's the core word in this? Daemon. Daemon is Greek for true self or godlike self. And the Greeks believed that that was in our head somewhere. We literally had this inner daemon, this true self, that told us the right answers all the time. Socrates, who was a street philosopher, would often be asked by a student such as Plato, you know, like some question that would stump Socrates. And Socrates would go, let me go into this alley and consult my inner daemon. And he'd come out 20 minutes later and go, I have the answer. They would liken Socrates to these Greek sculptures that are made in terracotta, these ancient Greek sculptures. And if you broke the sculpture, inside very often was a golden figurine. And they called that golden figurine the daemon. They said, Socrates is like that. He's like that inner true self, that inner daemon. So Barbara Fredrickson is a psychologist at the University of North Carolina, and she wanted to study eudaimonic well-being. Eudaimonic well-being would be living to your true self, your godlike self. It represents self-transcendence. It represents thinking about things bigger than yourself. Remember, I'm on the lake and my daughter says to me, you have to get over this, Dad. You have to get over your ego. You have to start thinking about other things other than yourself and your own grief. That sounds kind of weird, but it's what saved my life, literally. So thinking more about love and compassion and kindness and community, those people are eudaimonically happy. People who are interested in their Maserati and their money and everything about them, they are hedonically happy. People have balances of both, obviously, we all do. But some people are very balanced, more, shifted more hedonically versus eudaimonically. Barbara Fredrickson wanted to study that. And what she found is that hedonically happy people tended to have more pro-inflammatory cell production. That's not good. People who are eudaimonically well had less. People who are hedonically well had less antibody cell production. That's not good either. Versus people who are eudaimonically well had a lot of it. Both groups, by the way, hedonically well, eudaimonically well, were happy. She asked everybody, how happy are you? You couldn't tell the difference between a happy person by whether they're hedonically happy or eudaimonically happy. You could only tell by their physiology, which was 180 degrees different. Isn't that fascinating? People didn't believe this Pollyannish study for quite a while. They said, nah, more studies. 3 more studies have been done now, including one in Japan, found exactly the same results, if not stronger. So these are interesting studies so far, to me. This is an interesting study by one of my colleagues, Adam Grant, who's now at the Wharton School of Business, and he's a really great psychologist. He's written a New York Times best-selling book called Give and Take. And so his wife was having a baby. And he was at the hospital. And he noticed that a lot of doctors and the midwife and nurses would walk in and forget to wash their hands. And he'd go, excuse me, would you mind washing your hands? And his wife is there kind of, in labor. And so they go, oh, sorry. Absolutely right, sorry. I just washed them in the other room, but I forgot to do it here. Sorry about that. And, fine, no problem, washing hands. Then another person would come in, forget to wash their hands. I go, would you mind washing your hands? And after the 3rd time, he started getting kind of peed off. He got upset. And he said, you know what? I have to do something about this. And by now, his wife is like 6, 7 centimeters dilated and, not good. And he's going, what could I do? And then another person walked in, didn't wash their hands. Would you mind washing your hands? Fine. He said, I know. I'm going to do a study. And he's working out a study while she's 8 centimeters dilated. Her toes are splayed. She's screaming. He's going, I think I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to take all the hand sanitizers and I'm going to put 2 different messages on them randomly. I'm going to put hand hygiene prevents you from catching diseases. Or hand hygiene prevents patients from catching diseases. I just want to see which one causes people to wash their hands more. Now, you could, and here's what he did. He waited for, by the way, gigantic difference between these 2 interventions, right? Boy, this is a 12-step program. This is psychotherapy. No, it's one word that's different. That's it, one word, you, patients. Do you care about you, hedonic, other people, patients? Which is more important? Then he followed people for 2 weeks. Now, how did he follow them? Did he survey people and say, when you read this sign, were you more likely to wash your hands? Of course not. That'd be a terrible study. People would all lie. It would not be a good study, right? Did you wash your hands? Of course I do. All the time, every time. That's what everybody says. So here's what he did. He dumped out all the hand sanitizing gel into big vats, and he weighed it at the end. So he knew exactly how much it weighed at first, and then he looked at how much it weighed 2 weeks later. Isn't that cool? This is such a neat study. And here's what happened. 66% of the hand sanitizing gel was still in the you, but less than half was still in it for patients when you thought about other people. You actually did more when you're thinking about other people. You perform better. So if you are a hospital administrator in this room and want people to wash their hands, or a medical director, put the right sign on. Or if you make hand sanitizing gel, you manufacture it, I'd say the right sign makes most sense. Here's another study. This is done at the University of Michigan with college students. It started with this message. It said, you weren't picked. How did this work out? So there are 92 college students in this study, and they were told, Each student was told individually, you know, there are a whole bunch of groups. We have over a dozen groups who are all going to participate in this special activity, and write down all your information here on this information sheet. We'll give it to the dozen-plus groups. You'll be picked by many of the groups. You'll get to pick the group you want to work in, I'm sure, because, you know, I'm sure you're a great person, and they'll select you. Then, a little later, they said, by the way, this hasn't happened before, but you weren't picked by any of the groups. We're sorry. We don't need you for the study because you weren't. Doesn't that make you feel sad? It makes you feel sad because everybody has not been picked for something, a basketball team or whatever. You know, you haven't been picked for something, and it makes you upset. It threatens your ego. And that's what they're doing on purpose. There were no groups. Psychologists are liars. They lied to everybody. They said, you just weren't picked deliberately to threaten their ego. And they said, look, would you participate in another study for us? And a lot of them said, you know, I don't have anything to do except be in this stupid study. They said, no, here's the study. First of all, we just want you to write down a little bit of information over 5 minutes. And one group, they said, write down your eudaimonic values, empathy, support, community. What do you like when you're like that? What's your best self when you're empathic? What's your best self in that case? Another group said, what's your best self when you're super powerful? If you were rich, super attractive, whatever. And nobody had trouble writing down those core values in either group. They just spent about 5 minutes writing these down. The control condition, write down your daily routine. Then they said, okay, so I know you want to leave, but we have this study that involves these cookies, this bowl of cookies, and we need them taste tested. We like the taste and the aroma and the color and the texture rated, if it's okay. And oddly enough, 92 out of the 92 college students said, okay, I'm in, no problem. And then as the researcher was leaving, she said, and by the way, have as many as you like. What do you think they're studying? They just threaten their ego. We know that when you threaten your ego, you eat more cookies. We know that you drink more if you're a drinker. We know you smoke more if you're a smoker, take more drugs if you're a drug abuser, et cetera. So we knew that that would happen. And here, sure enough, these college students, this is what happened. The group, the control condition, ate 8 cookies. I wasn't picked. Oh, no, I'm eating 8 cookies. Are you kidding me? I have these same kind of college students, University of Michigan college students. We call them the leaders and the best. They, you know, on average, they're in the top 5th percentile in their SATs and their ACTs and their, you know, high school, et cetera. They have Supreme Court justices writing recommendations. That's a bad example now. But whatever, you know, you see the point, though. They have amazing pedigrees coming in. They are the leaders and best. And I said, so you guys are the leaders and best. I turned to, you know, just like this. They're all my college students. I say, and then we hurt your feelings and you eat 8 cookies? Really? Do you have any willpower? And they go, no, we don't. We have no willpower. But you see what happens when you write down your values. Hedonic values, 5 cookies. Eudaimonic values, 3 cookies. This is Amy Wisniewski. She is a professor at Yale. She was giving a talk. She's a graduate of Michigan. See, I'm so conflicted. But anyway, she said this. There's an increasing emphasis at work on fulfillment and meaning and purpose in life today as individuals spend more time at work and change jobs more often and more readily than in the past. People aren't as loyal. People will accept $20,000 less in salary if they feel the job has meaning and purpose. On average, $20,000 less. And yet, this is our American workforce, right? So in our US workforce, 37% of employees clearly know the company's purpose. 20% of the US workforce are enthusiastic about that purpose. 20% see how they could support the purpose. 15% feel that they're enabled to work toward the purpose. 20% fully trust the company that employs them. What if that were a football team? You have 11 players, Tom Brady. And by the way, Tom, 4 of them know which goal they're going toward. Tom, 2 of them really care. 2 players know which position they're supposed to be playing. Sorry, Tom. 2 players believe that their efforts on the field could make a difference, and 8 of them would just as likely be rooting for the other team. We laugh because it is funny, but at the same time, why do we laugh at that? Why aren't we crying? Because our organizations are like a football team. They should be, right? Shouldn't we be all heading toward the same goal? Shouldn't we be working as a team together? To me, that makes a lot of sense. Very often our senior leaders believe that they are. This is an Ernst & Young study that just came out very recently in Harvard Business Review. 98% of CEOs think their employees understand the purpose, but only 50% of the EVPs think that. And as you go down in the company, fewer and fewer people say, I don't know what our purpose is. So to start wrapping this up, what is your purposeful self? Well, one way to find out is if you have a smartphone, you just look at your wallpaper. What's your wallpaper? That's my dad. That's my wife. That's my dog, Uncle Lenny. People have different things. This is my hobby. This is what I love to see, Matisse cutouts, my favorite band. These are some interesting experiences. My students, after teaching them as if they're my own daughter, nominated me to be the Professor of the Year a few years ago. And I get a call from Jim Harbaugh. He says, would you be the honorary captain, for our team at homecoming? I went, you're joking. You're not Jim Harbaugh. And he'd go, I am. I'm really Jim Harbaugh. And I said, yeah, I used to do that at Stanford. I said, you are not. You're one of my friends just messing with me. He said, I'm Jim Harbaugh, really. Come over to practice. And sure enough, he said, I want you to flip the coin, which is fun. Are just fun experiences. My students, who I care about a lot, my colleagues, my dean. So those are things you might ask. What's on the wallpaper of my phone? Very often that's like a cue. Now I'm going to ask you to pull out these sheets. And if you could take a look at the sheet, because this is the beginning of a purpose. You start by asking, what do you value most? What makes you your best self? And if you don't mind spending the next couple of minutes thinking about, in each of these domains, personal, family, work, and community, choose up to 5 words within each domain. Hopefully not more than 5. Try to be selective. Maybe even go 3 words if I can, that you say, this represents my aspirational best self. Not who I am usually. It represents my aspirational best self. This is who I want to be. This is when I'm at my best. And if you don't mind just taking a couple minutes filling this out. It takes no more than a couple minutes. By the way, don't put your name on it. This is totally anonymous, but I am going to collect them because I'd like to build a word cloud of this and start and feed it back to people here. When you finish that, if you wouldn't mind rating for me, on a scale of 1 to 10, what's the strength of my purpose in life? Where 1 is, I don't have any purpose in my life, I'm wandering around aimlessly, to 10, I have a super strong purpose. How happy are you? I'm not happy at all, that's a 1. 10 is, I'm super happy. How burned out are you? 1 is, I'm not burned out at all. 10 is, I am super toast. One final thing in this. As you mark these, what's important to you, like let's say I'm calm. My best self is I'm calm. My best self, I'm kind. My best self, I'm hardworking. I'd like you to also rate, just with a plus or minus, whether you actually are regularly calm, whether you really are regularly kind, whether you regularly are hardworking. So for the things you mark, put a plus or a minus sign to the right, depending on whether you are that way typically. I know that's crude, but I just want a crude metric of whether, maybe you say, my best self is being calm. I'm never calm, or, very rarely. It's hard for me to be calm. This making sense so far? Any questions? Do I have a pencil? I will get you one, yeah. I've got so many hotel pens here. There you go. Yeah. Now here's one final thing, if you don't mind. And I'm really interested in whether you do mind about this. If you're doing really well in one or a couple of these, do you want to tell us your secret? Could you give us a little advice on how you do well in that area? This will not be published, by the way, so we're not going through IRB approval or anything. We just wanted to, just a little survey of where you guys are. I did this, I was in Maui 3 days ago. I did this at a big national OB-GYN conference, too. It was really interesting. And by the way, here's what they said. They said hardworking, it's really important to them. Being kind, very important. Energetic. In terms of their family, parenting, loving, being a spouse and partner, being dependable. In terms of work, look at this. Calm under pressure. That was surprising to see so many people saying calm under pressure. And then in terms of their community, they said giving, charitable, and generous. So one of the things I'm doing, this is Madeline Julia. She is my new granddaughter. One of the things we're doing is building an application, an app for smartphones and the web. We're trying this with the AARP. We're trying it with patient populations to control pain, and to manage diabetes, things like that. We're trying it with employees to build greater work-life balance and with their families. And in this application, we're helping them find more purpose and then coaching them to develop more energy to find purpose. So to wrap up, I would just like to say that Steve Jobs once said, he was giving the commencement address at Stanford University, and he was dying of pancreatic cancer. And he said to this group of shining stars of our world right now, seniors graduating from Stanford University, he said, guys, death is life's change agent. It's the single most important invention known to humanity. Pretty amazing that he would talk about death to this group of 22-year-old stars, right? And basically, that happened to me as well. Death changed me. It turned me into a different kind of person completely. The life of my daughter changed me and allowed me to live my life in Technicolor. I'm not afraid of death. I'm not afraid of dying. Mark Twain once said, I'm not afraid of dying. I'm really afraid of not living. And I really feel that most of us live on automatic. Most of us don't think about our lives. They're not present in our lives. They're worried about the past all the time and what we did. We feel guilty or bad about something we did or said. And we're worried about the future. We're stressed about what might happen. But we're not actually enjoying today. We're not enjoying our loved ones. We're not giving a kiss to our loved ones or buying that little gift that might make our loved one very happy. We're not interacting. We get home, we have 200 more emails to do. And we say, I need an old-fashioned. And we just start doing our emails, and our spouse or partner comes to us and says, you're not even here. I go, I am too here. I'm not at work. No, you're not here. You're really not. Say, you just need your brain to melt. That's all. Well, we need more energy and vitality to do that, to live a purposeful life. But one thing we've found is when you live a purposeful life, that gives you energy. So I'm just hoping we all think about things. Without having to have somebody die in our lives, we can start thinking about things like, what are we here on this planet for? Thank you very much. I can hang around. I know many of you have to leave. I'm happy to hang around here as long as you like to answer questions. Yes?
I don't know if this is a question or a comment, but Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
Very successful, but when you read about his life,
Kind of a jerk.
many of us would like to do the things he did.
Right.
So I would like to hear your opinion on what is known to increase the weight of that guru in our brain versus that reptile amygdala.
Yeah.
We work with people like Steve Jobs
Yeah.
or live in a country with presidents like nameless people.
Without getting political. Right. We did this. I didn't mention the other part of the study we did in MRI. We had one group with 3 groups. One is a control condition in MRI. One was thinking more about their purpose. And the third group was engaged in loving-kindness meditation. Loving-kindness meditation starts by putting yourself in a beautiful place. You calm down, you rest, relax, take some deep breaths. You put yourself in this beautiful place. You bring in a person who you love deeply. By the way, you guys want to do it? It's 5 minutes? How about if we do loving-kindness meditation? Do you want to repair your DNA? 5 minutes? Okay, typically this is 20 minutes. So we're going to do the 5-minute version of LKM. We good with that? If you have to leave, this is a good time. All right. What I'm going to ask everyone to do is just get comfortable in your chair. Maybe close your eyes. Take a few slow, deep breaths. You can do this for 20 minutes, when you get home if you want. If you want to keep your eyes open, that's fine, but closing your eyes probably is a little more restful. Imagine in the front of your eyelids there, in the back of your eyelids, a beautiful place. Put yourself into one of the most beautiful places you can. Maybe it's by the ocean. Maybe it's in a beautiful forest, in a beautiful field. And invite a person into this beautiful place that you love very deeply. This person may be alive, or they may have passed. And you turn to this person that you love very, very deeply, and you wish this person peace, and you wish them freedom from suffering. And they turn back and wish you peace, and they wish you freedom from suffering. Now we bring another person in, a person who you don't know, but you've seen. Maybe a person in this room you've seen, but you don't know that person. Maybe a person who served you coffee this morning. You've seen them, but you don't know them. This stranger you bring in, they sit down next to you in your beautiful place. You turn to them and you wish them peace, and you wish them freedom from suffering. They turn back and they wish you peace and freedom from suffering. And you both smile, and this person appreciates your kind gesture. Now, this next step is more difficult. You bring in a person now who you have a very difficult time with. This could be a friend who you've had a big argument with. It could be a loved one, a family member. It could be a political figure. It could be someone in history. A person you really are having a very hard time with. You bring this person in, and they sit down next to you. And if you can't stand this, you can turn this person into a childlike version of themselves. And you turn to this person and you wish this person peace, and you wish this person freedom from suffering. This person smiles and is surprised and turns back and wishes you peace and freedom from suffering. Now, if we can take just a few moments to take nice deep breath and enjoy this beautiful space. And now very slowly open our eyes. There's a longer version of this, of course, that involves bringing in everybody in this room, everybody in Portland, everybody in Oregon, everybody eventually in the world, then all living creatures, and you can keep going and going on this, but the idea you can understand. I guess this is my answer to your question. How do we try to help other people? This third group we had transcending, self-transcending through loving kindness meditation. They had exactly the same response in the prefrontal cortex. And they were also had the same curve where the more blood flow in the prefrontal cortex, the more they reduce their sedentary behavior. So threatening messages, threatening people, this idea of extending love and kindness, transcending our arguments, may be a very important way to, first step towards solving some problems that we have. That's my opinion, and there is some science that suggests that's the case. Any other question? I promise not to, have an answer that's that long. But thank you for that wonderful question. Yeah, hi. Here, you have to talk up or here.
Thanks for coming. In your research, have you looked at spirituality, religious beliefs, et cetera, and how that fits?
That's a wonderful question. So whenever we do studies, epidemiologic studies of purpose in life, we put in religiosity because, you know, we might think, okay, this is just religious people. And religious people, actually, we have a brand new study that's just going to be published soon, finding that people who have a strong purpose there's a part of the brain that relates to conflict called the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. And that conflict center loads up our cognition, and we can't think as well when we're conflicted. You know, do I want the wine or do I want to play with the kids? You know, that sort of thing. But purposeful people have less conflict. Less blood flow goes there. We mimic that study off of a study previously that looked at religiosity. Very religious people have less conflict as well. Now, there is a famous book called The Purpose-Driven Life. And in the very first paragraph, it says, you cannot have a purpose without God. And this is written by a minister. I don't agree with that. In fact, I wrote both of my books almost in a response to that, because Einstein, an atheist, had a very strong purpose. Paul Newman, an atheist, had very strong self-transcending purpose. I believe you can have a purpose. And by the way, in terms of, and this is no rap on religion, it's just that when we put religiosity into the same statistical model, religion drops out when purpose goes in. In other words, what this is suggesting is that religion is working through helping people find a purpose. Now, I'm sure people say, no, Vic, it's God, and that's fine. I mean, you know, I'm accepting of all these. I'm a fierce agnostic, actually. I have no idea. I'm a little ant, so I don't know. But what I do know is that we can study whether it's the religiosity or whether it's the purpose, and it appears to be purposeful people. That make sense? Okay, great. Yes, hi. Yeah, have I been visited by my daughter at any other times? I have not, and I have wanted to have that. That's kind of a personal thing. I actually went to northern India, to Rishikesh, and studied with a guru there, meditating in many ways. In a way, when I meditate, I've been a meditator for 30 years, and this is a very personal thing. I don't think I've ever been asked that question, and I have given many hundreds of talks about this. When I meditate, I see my daughter's live eye inside the inner part of my eyelid, and it's blinking and it's looking at me, and that doesn't go away. And I talked to this guru and I said, what is that? You know, is she in a different place, a different part of the universe, and kind of channeling and looking at me while I'm meditating? Because when I'm meditating, I'm in this special space. And he went, no, but she lives in you, and she'll always live in you. So, boy, you had to ask that, didn't you? But no, that's a great question. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, right, yeah, yeah. Right, right. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. Yeah. Take care.